Saturday night at UFC 311, the UFC officially announced UFC 313, Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev for the light heavyweight title, and the co-main event, Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker. What an incredible card. It goes down on March 8th in Las Vegas. We're going to take a look at the rest of the card at the end of this video if you guys want to talk about that as well. But let me start off by saying, man, that Dagestani privilege that Magomed Ankalaev got, man, he sure got some privilege. I mean, going on a 13-fight unbeaten streak, getting ducked multiple times, only to finally get the fight on March 8th. March 8th, 2025. That couldn't possibly, no way that's during Ramadan, right? Which I think was done intentionally, by the way, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And it's also, wait a second, hold on a second. It's at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas? Wait a sec. Wait, it's not in Abu Dhabi? I thought Ankalaev demanded Abu Dhabi. He demanded not to fight during Ramadan. He deserved to be skipped over. He didn't deserve any Dagestani privilege, which, by the way, is a myth. But either way, we finally have the fight. We'll talk about all those things throughout this video. We finally have the fight. I'm so thankful to the UFC for finally making this fight. I told you guys, I was hopeful. I was optimistic that maybe this fight would happen. But in my gut, I just felt like Pereira versus Ankalaev would never happen. I just felt like it was never going to happen. It was one of those fights. If you've been watching as long as I've been watching, it seems like every time you really want a specific fight, it never ends up coming to fruition. And I've wanted Pereira versus Ankalaev for so long, it seems now, that I was just dead set like, look, I'm not counting on it to happen. The UFC finally made the right fight for the light heavyweight division after making a short notice fight against Yuri Prochazka, a short notice fight really against Jamal Hill as well at UFC 300 that nobody really even talks about. Then a weird fight against Khalil Roundtree, the number 8 guy in the division. And then there was still question of whether or not he was going to fight Magomed Ankalaev when Ankalaev had a fight a couple weeks later against Alexander Rakic to extend his unbeaten streak to 13. But the UFC finally booked it. I absolutely love this matchup. This is a banger matchup. And you know what? As much as I've complained and whined, as some people would say, Joey, stop crying about it. Stop riding the Dagestani guys because, it's riding the Dagestani guys if you want to see the rightful number 1 contender fight the champion. Oh, God forbid. And he happens to be Dagestani. But at the end of the day, I will say this, and I tweeted something out to the effect of this earlier. The UFC delaying this fight and not having Ankalaev get the title shot earlier made this fight so much bigger. I mean, this fight, in my opinion, is massive. I know, maybe it doesn't have that superstar that's going to draw in 1 million pay-per-view buys, but Pereira's star power is growing. It is significant at this point. I wouldn't say he's a massive draw, but he's a mid-tier draw for the UFC. And now he's fighting Magomed Ankalaev, that stylistically is the worst matchup in the light heavyweight division and the toughest challenge for Pereira in the light heavyweight division. And for once, it's not on short notice and it's not a guy being rushed back from an injury. So this is going to be a very compelling matchup. And I know a lot of people think, because this narrative has been pushed out there a lot, man, Ankalaev's going to wrestle him, Ankalaev's boring, and this and that. Ankalaev's primarily a striker. In case you've lived under a rock, in case you just follow whatever narratives are spewed by, brain dead MMA fans online, Ankalaev's primarily a striker. Does he have grappling? Yes, he does. He says he's not going to mix it in this fight. I think ultimately Ankalaev will probably mix in the grappling if he starts, getting those legs chopped early, which we've seen Ankalaev get his legs chopped brutally by Jan Blachowicz. Then he implemented the grappling. I could see something similar happening in this fight. Alex Pereira has the best leg kicks in the UFC. Obviously, Ankalaev's heavy on that lead leg. Rakic was even implementing some leg kicks in their fight back, last year and last October in Abu Dhabi. UFC, what was that? Now I'm trying to remember. UFC 308, I believe it was. Rakic had some success there. Pereira has the most effortless and damaging calf kicks in the UFC, arguably. So it's going to be interesting to see how that game plays out. But Ankalaev is a super defensively responsible counter striker. And I really do believe this is the toughest possible matchup for Pereira, because also Ankalaev can mix in the grappling. Now, he's not known for his wrestling. He's not known for implementing his, a grapple-heavy game plan. But if things start to go sour and he starts to get outstruck by Pereira, which I'm not even saying is going to happen, he has the ability to fall back on that game plan. And I think, as much as he's saying, I'm just going to strike with Pereira, this and that, if it starts to go bad or feel like he's at a disadvantage, I think it'll be like the Jan Blachowicz fight, where the first 2 rounds, he got his legs chopped. He had mild success on the feet, but then 3, 4, and 5, he grappled all those rounds because his leg was compromised. And Pereira has, more damaging leg kicks than Jan Blachowicz. And I do believe, whether it's part Pereira, part UFC, or mainly UFC and small part Pereira, I do believe Pereira is not scared of Ankalaev, but Pereira is aware that Ankalaev is the hardest matchup in the division. The UFC is aware as well. And I do believe that this fight was strategically made, because Ankalaev, and we're going to go through some tweets. They actually were tweeting back and forth today, but we're going to go through some tweets where Ankalaev had said, look, I accepted the fight for December. I accepted it for January. I accepted it for February. I accepted it for March. And I do believe that Pereira and the UFC were thinking, maybe he won't accept it for Ramadan. Maybe he won't accept it during Ramadan. And if he does, we're going to have him at a disadvantage. I think this was purposely made that way. Now, what's crazy is it's March 8th. UFC 313 is March 8th. It's right around the corner, but they've known about this fight for a few weeks now, probably over a month at this point, I would say. So it's not really short notice. It's not really thrown together last minute, even though, it's almost February. It's literally like it's about 6 weeks away from this fight, which makes me so excited. I'm so excited for this card. 313, while the entire card isn't great, and again, we'll look at the entire card here in a second, this is a great matchup between the 2 best light heavyweights. And honestly, if you guys have followed my channel for any period of time, if you haven't, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, like this video. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm going Ankalaev. I think Ankalaev wins this fight pretty easily. I think Pereira, while he's very, very good, and for some reason people think I hate him because I kind of call out the asterisks on his resume. If you look at his resume, and I'll pull it up, actually put it on screen for you real quick. If you pull up his resume, the last win against Khalil Rountree means absolutely nothing. And he lost 2 rounds there, which is crazy. He got the finish. It is what it is. Khalil Rountree isn't a complete bomb, but Khalil Rountree literally robbed Dustin Jacoby, who's not even a good fighter, not even in the rankings. I mean, he's okay. The fight before that against Yuri Prochazka is on a couple weeks' notice. Yuri is a very, good matchup for Alex Pereira. I'm not saying that Yuri isn't good. Yuri obviously just went out there and knocked out Jamal Hill. Then before that, Jamal Hill was forced into returning earlier than he wanted to because they needed a main event for UFC 300, had an Achilles tear, was supposed to return later than that. And then the Yuri Prochazka before that was a similar situation. Yuri had a shoulder injury, was forced to return a little bit earlier than he should have. So while, don't get me wrong, I think Pereira has, strung together a very good win streak. You look back at Jan Blachowicz. Jan Blachowicz is not known for his grappling. I think Pereira lost that fight. I thought he lost 1 and 3 pretty clearly, and he got out-grappled badly in the first round. Got his back taken by Blachowicz. Fight before that, he got brutally KO'd by Israel Adesanya. The fight before that, he beat Adesanya, but Adesanya won the majority of that fight and looked like Khabib Nurmagomedov during the fight. So I'm going Magomed Ankalaev. I think Magomed Ankalaev can easily strike with Alex Pereira. He doesn't get hit often. You look at his resume. I understand it's not the greatest resume ever by any means. 13-fight unbeaten streak, regardless of who it's against, is very hard to string together. Rakic is a very dangerous opponent. Not in finishing ability, but he's super well-rounded. And, he's one of the elite guys in the light heavyweight division. Rakic could beat Pereira. I know that sounds crazy. Rakic could literally beat Pereira tomorrow, okay? Now, Rakic, again, isn't like he's not a former champion or anything, but at light heavyweight, former champions are a dime a dozen, it seems. Johnny Walker, he brutally KO'd Johnny Walker, made it look easy. Doesn't really mean a whole lot, but the division itself isn't that good. And then he had a draw with Jan Blachowicz, which was a split draw, which the majority of people scored 3, 4, and 5 for Ankalaev, or 4 and 5, and then 5 was a 10-8. I might be messing up the scorecards. And you could have scored round 1 for Ankalaev as well. And Ankalaev, most people thought Ankalaev won that fight. It was close. I don't think it was horrible to make it a draw. It was for a title fight. And then he never got a shot at the belt afterwards, even though most people thought he beat Jan Blachowicz, and they threw together on short notice Jamal Hill, Glover Teixeira, because Glover Teixeira was offered Ankalaev on the same card, but Glover ducked him. Outright ducked him, turned him down. But then now you have a draw. The title's vacant because Yuri got injured. So they booked Glover Teixeira, Jamal Hill, and that's when Jamal Hill won the belt, and then he tore his Achilles. But either way, I think Ankalaev beat Jan Blachowicz. I think Jan Blachowicz beat Pereira, and while MMA math doesn't always work, I think Magomed Ankalaev is a better fighter. He's more well-rounded. I mean, Pereira made Israel Adesanya look like Khabib Nurmagomedov. So I think Ankalaev can strike with him. I think he's an excellent counter striker. He has good power. He has good finishing ability. You know, I know people say, oh, he's boring. He has 13. He's on a 13-fight win streak right now. Okay, unbeaten streak, actually. I say win streak, I think, before as well. 13-fight unbeaten streak. And he has 6 UFC finishes in 12 fights. Okay, 6 UFC finishes in 12 fights. That's not bad by any means. Okay, I know people are going to, oh, he's Dagestani. He must be boring. No, that doesn't mean. But there's another thing I want to look at. Let's actually jump back to showing you my screen real quick. Ankalaev is demanding Abu Dhabi. This was Ankalaev demanding Abu Dhabi. Alex Pereira versus me, Abu Dhabi. By the way, this call out made perfect sense at the time. Then he also posted, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, New York, Vegas, doesn't matter, anywhere, anytime, by KO, be ready, Alex. This was, again, these two tweets were used to push the narrative. Ankalaev demanded Abu Dhabi. Then you also have Magomed Ankalaev, November of last year. I was offered 3 dates, December, February, March, and I agreed to all 3 dates. I have to win by KO. I have no problem. It's condition. Look, maybe I'm reading between the lines a little bit too much. That tells me the UFC told him, you know, we prefer you strike. So not only has the UFC kind of left Ankalaev out in the cold a little bit in terms of the date, the fight spin, oh, it's going to happen here, it's going to happen there. I think, you know, the UFC's been called out by multiple fighters for influencing them and their game plans in certain fights to not be grapple heavy. Now, Ankalaev isn't a grappler, but half the UFC's casuals, they're like, Ankalaev, Dagestani last name, he must be a grappler. He grappled Jan Blachowicz, he must be a grappler. So I have to win by KO. I have no problem. It is condition. What does that tell you? But either way, here's what I think happened, okay? Let me break this down. Let me wrap this fight up because I want to talk about the co-main event. I want to talk about the whole card. Magomed Ankalaev was being ducked by Alex Pereira on multiple occasions, whether it was fully Alex Pereira's fault or not, or it was a combination of his fault and the UFC. It was an embarrassment. The fact he's fighting number 8 Khalil Roundtree, when Ankalaev had a fight a couple weeks later against Rockage, they literally could have matched him up, and they didn't because they know Alex Pereira has star power. They want to keep him champion as long as possible, and they're worried that Ankalaev could beat him. That's a fact, and they think Ankalaev isn't as promotable. But now they really have no other option. I mean, what else are they going to book Pereira? Are they going to book him against another number 8 guy? They're going to book him against Carlos Ulberg? They're going to book him in a rematch against Jan Blachowicz? It wouldn't make any sense. But what the UFC is doing here is they're stacking the deck against Ankalaev. They're like, you know what? Let's kind of jerk him around with the dates a little bit, keep him in a long training camp, and then let's offer him a fight during Ramadan. Now, Ramadan, I believe, starts about a week before March 8th, so he'll be a little bit at a disadvantage, but it's not like his entire camp will be during Ramadan. It's not like, you know, the fight's announced for, I don't know, early April, late March. I think that would be a little bit more of a disadvantage to Ankalaev, but at the end of the day, he accepted the fight. It is what it is. I do believe Ankalaev will win this fight. I think he finishes Pereira. Whether it's on the feet, we've seen Pereira got brutally hurt by Adesanya in the first fight, almost KO'd in the first round, got brutally slept in the second round. And I just see Ankalaev catching him with a shot and probably putting him away without even having to grapple. But if he needs to, I think he can grapple. And I think he would finish Pereira on the ground. Pereira's grappling is atrocious. And I know it's probably improved over the last couple years, training with Glover Teixeira and whatnot. But it's just, he's primarily a kickboxer. And his takedown defense is horrible. And his jiu-jitsu isn't that good. And Jan Blachowicz is taking his back. I see Ankalaev, if he starts getting leg kicked, if he starts getting clipped with shots, even though he doesn't get hit very much, doesn't get touched very much, I do think he will implement the ground game. I do think he will finish Alex Pereira. A couple other things I want to take a look at really quickly. Okay? We also have some more recent tweets from them back and forth. We have this one for December. It won't be Ankalaev. Again, a little bit of mind games here. Magomed Ankalaev tweeted back at January 11th, said, "Seeing you soon, boy." I think that's probably when Ankalaev found out. I think Pereira knew for a while. I think Magomed Ankalaev found out probably around January 11th, but they were hoping that was going to be the fight. Again, because I think the UFC wanted to give Pereira an advantage, similar to what they did with O'Malley against Aljamain Sterling, to try to stack the deck because they wanted a particular fighter to win. And then more recently, you also have Magomed tweeting out at Alex Pereira, he go to all the UFC fights to get free alcohol and get on camera time. On the other hand, I've been training so hard. March 8th, alcohol not help you. And I think he means Chama at the end. And then the see you soon boy, or see you soon boy, thinking of Yoel Romero. See you soon, Ankalaev. He also said, you just signed your death certificate. I'm going to punish you for ducking me, and I'm going to make you look like the guy who works at a tire shop, not professional fighter. Which that may or may not be maybe Ali Abdelaziz, his manager, tweeting that out. But I think it's hilarious. We'll end the discussion of the main event with this. I think it is absolutely comical and hilarious that fans tried to duck Ankalaev and justify Ankalaev getting ducked by Pereira because they like Pereira and they don't like the Dagestanis by saying, oh yeah, Ankalaev demanded Abu Dhabi. Completely false narrative. They said Ankalaev turned down a fight. They use an auto caption from one interview where Ankalaev said something along the lines of, I wouldn't fight at UFC 300 due to Ramadan, even though he was never offered the fight. Not Dana White has ever said Ankalaev turned down the fight. Not Pereira has ever said Ankalaev has ever turned down a fight offer. At the end of the day, they were trying to keep Pereira away from Ankalaev long enough that maybe Ankalaev would lose to like a Rakic. That's what they were hoping on. And now that they can't anymore, they are setting up Ankalaev to fight during Ramadan to give Pereira an advantage. Ultimately, I don't think it will matter, but it's also hilarious that they're fighting in Las Vegas. Oh man, this Dagestani privilege, they only want to fight in Abu Dhabi. They wear turbans there, there's camels there, they only want to fight in Abu Dhabi. At one point, Jamal Hill's dumbass was saying, Ankalaev ain't got a visa, even though he had just fought in Vegas at that point in time. So I think it's hilarious that Ankalaev fighting during Ramadan in Vegas. And you know what's funny? Even if Ankalaev was willing to take this fight on this date in Vegas, had they booked another fight for Pereira, I think truly what the fans would have done is they would have automatically say, yeah, Ankalaev turned it down. He didn't want to fight in Vegas. He didn't want to fight during Ramadan. They would have ran with that narrative, even if nobody said it. They would have just ran with that narrative. So it's absolutely hilarious to see Magomed Ankalaev taking on Alex Pereira in Vegas during Ramadan. And I do think he will become the new light heavyweight champion. And then we'll probably see a rematch later this year. It is a massive fight. I'm super excited for it. I'm glad the UFC put it together. Now, the co-main event, we have Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker. This is a banger. Now, obviously, it's not as good as a light heavyweight title fight, but this is a banger co-main event. And I'm so glad that this is a fresh matchup. Because honestly, I'm tired. It felt like all the lightweights are fighting each other. Like Poirier's fighting Chandler, Chandler's fighting Gaethje, Poirier's fighting Gaethje, Chandler's fighting, they're all fighting each other. It was like this circle jerk between the lightweight division. And then nobody wanted to fight kind of the guys coming up a little bit. And I know Dan Hooker's been around forever, but I'm just happy to see a fresh lightweight matchup. Dan Hooker's had a resurgence. I mean, Dan Hooker has looked incredible in his last few fights. You look at his last few fights, wins a split decision against Mateusz Gamrot in a great fight at UFC 305. Fight before that, split decision win against Jalen Turner in a grueling fight. Dan Hooker's super durable, took a nasty head kick in that fight. Fight before that, destroyed Claudio Puelles. Absolutely destroyed him as he drug his ass on the carpet. Now, this is a tougher matchup to predict, to be quite honest, because for me, any other time, I'm easily going with Justin Gaethje. But just seeing how he got brutally slept and KO'd at UFC 300, and if you've been watching the sport for long enough, you realize guys that break their nose, like the way Justin Gaethje has broken his nose several times, they're just never the same. To name one fighter, Rory McDonald broke his nose several times, was just never the same. And I mean, his nose was absolutely destroyed by a spinning back kick against Max Holloway. And then he eventually got slept. I mean, face down, one of the most brutal KOs in UFC history. And then you have Dan Hooker, who's crazy durable, who seems to be improving in his later years. And I think, basically the way I see this fight is, and I know Dan Hooker at one point in time looked like he was falling off, and he's not particularly young himself. He's 34 years old. Justin Gaethje right now is 36 years old. I feel like Dan Hooker is kind of going up, or, even if it's just slightly. And Justin Gaethje's on the decline, and it's not like one of these guys has a grappling advantage over the other. To be honest, if I had to give a grappling advantage, I'd probably give it to Dan Hooker. And you look at Dan Hooker's career, I know he's been finished, but he got finished by Arnold Allen at featherweight, malnourished Dan Hooker. In the Jalen Turner fight, in the Gamrot fight, he showed very good durability. The finish before that was against Islam. He got Kimura'd on short notice. There's no shame in that. He got KO'd by Michael Chandler 4 years ago. So it's been 3 years since he's been finished by KO or TKO. Justin Gaethje's power is significant, but nothing really crazy insane. He head kick KO'd Dustin Poirier. He beat Fiziev by decision. He beat Michael Chandler by decision. He KO'd Tony Ferguson, but that was more of like a TKO. Obviously, well, it wasn't a KO. It was more of an accumulation. It wasn't really like his power that did it. And then before that, he KO'd Donald Cowboy Cerrone on his way out. So for an early prediction for this fight, I'm going to go Dan Hooker. I love that it's a fresh matchup. I do think ultimately it will be a banger, super exciting fight. And let's take a look at the rest of the card while we're at it. But I'm going Dan Hooker over Justin Gaethje. I might change my mind. That's an early prediction. I just can't get the image of Justin Gaethje face down, out cold, UFC 300. And I just feel like mentally it's got to be hard to return from that. It reminds me like Vicente Luque getting finished by Jeff Neal, having that brain bleed. And it's like, oh, is he ever going to return the same? That's how I feel about Justin Gaethje. Now, as far as the rest of the card, it's not that great, okay? Again, it's on March 8th, and it's in Las Vegas. After the main and co-main, right now you really don't have much. You have Amanda Lemos, Yasmin Lucindo. You have Bruno Fajeda, Armin Petrosyan, which is a really good prelim. The rest of these fights are all prelim fights, in my opinion. There's nothing really main card worthy. I don't think Lemos Lucindo even deserves to be on the main card. Now, that being said, there's only nine fights currently booked. So there's room for 4 or 5 more fights. They usually book 13 to 14 fights on a card. So I'm sure they'll add some significant, quality fights on UFC 313. But you guys know me. I always hold the UFC accountable when they book crappy cards. Like UFC 312 is an abomination. I'm probably going to make a video on that soon. But to be honest, even if this card is about as good as it is right now and there's no other like big fights added to it, which I think at least 1 or 2 more big fights will be added to it, I'm okay with it. Because these top 2 fights in Pereira versus Ankalaev and Gaethje versus Dan Hooker are incredible fights. You ain't going to get a complaint out of me. I'll be like, oh yeah, and the main card isn't that great, but look at the top 2 fights. The main event sells the card in and of itself. I cannot wait for Pereira Ankalaev. I think the UFC truly made the fight bigger by delaying it and not having, kind of trying to keep Ankalaev away from Pereira. It's finally happening in Las Vegas during Ramadan, despite the Dagestani privilege and the Abu Dhabi demands and not fighting during Ramadan and all these different demands that fans made up in an attempt to duck Ankalaev for Pereira. I cannot wait to see this fight. I think the fans are going to be at each other's throats. There's going to be the Dagestani haters and some of the Dagestani caught going head-to-head. I'm just looking forward to the matchup. I think it's a great matchup. Pereira has that power, man. There's no doubt that he could catch Ankalaev and put him away. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because Ankalaev's super defensively responsible. I'm going Ankalaev like a 1st or 2nd round TKO because I think Pereira just leaves himself open, and I think if Ank catches him, I think he's going to be able to put him away. I think Pereira's kind of chinny in a way. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point. So I cannot wait for this matchup. UFC 313, it's right around the corner. I cannot wait. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching.